distributing those throughout our network, so you should get invitations for all of those upcoming webinars. So we're now going to turn things over to Jim Pauley, and he's going to be presenting on Schneider Electric's energy optimization and reduction efforts. Jim? Hey, Jim? Sorry, Jim, maybe you should dial, hang your phone up and dial again. I'm not sure why why we can't hear you. Sorry, hold on just a second, everyone. Hello? Jim?
Yes.
Oh, oh, good, great. I can hear you now.
I was going to say, am I back now? Because for some reason I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me.
Oh no. Okay. Well, go ahead. Go ahead with your presentation, and thanks for being here today.
All right. Thanks. Thanks everybody, and thanks to everyone for being on the webinar today. I think I did an entire introductory speech before Chelsea let me know that nobody could hear me. Some of my folks would probably tell you those are the best webinars I give, or when you can't hear me. But it's great to have everybody today. I'm going to take you through a little bit about Schneider Electric and what we've done with our energy efficiency programs internally, and share with you a little bit that I think some successes that we've really been able to have over the years. I will mention on this first slide, Chelsea had mentioned about the Twitter universe earlier and MEEA's Twitter site. You can also follow myself on Twitter. That address is on the page. We tweet out an Energy Daily each morning that's kind of a compilation of stories around the energy space and around some of the policies and so forth that are going on in that space. So if you're a Twitter follower, feel free to give us a follow on Twitter. Let me talk a little bit first about Schneider Electric overall, and about 170 years of history with Schneider Electric. And I'm going to do this because I think it'll give you a good perspective where we come from in this energy efficiency space. Not only do we drive energy efficiency overall in our programs, but it's really what we do for our customers as well, and it's really in our lifeblood. So Schneider dates back to about 1836, originally started really in the steel industry, building cannons and a number of other things back in the 1800s. And throughout the 1990s, a number of acquisitions made by the company, and one of those major acquisitions in the U.S. was a company called Square D at the time in 1991, a name that many of you on this call may recognize and is still actually a brand of Schneider Electric today. And towards the end of the late 90s, we had really had throughout all of the 90s that power and control focus, and really throughout a lot of the 20th century. But the things begin to shift. And in the 2000s, we really made a change to really look much harder at the energy management space overall. So a number of acquisitions that went on at that time, some that you may recognize up here, some of the brands overall for Schneider Electric that you may know. I mentioned Square D as one of the brands. American Power Conversion, or APC Corporation, a major brand in the IT space. Pelco, a very well-known brand in the security space. And also for many of the folks on the call that may be with the utility side, certainly Ariba Distribution would be a name that you would recognize globally. And one that's not up here that was really an acquisition that we did about a year and a half ago is a company called Telvent that's very active in certainly the utility space, grid management, smart grid overall. So not only, as I said before, are we talking about what we do in energy efficiency in our facilities, this is what we do for our customers as well. So we come at this with a lot of tools, a lot of insight, and a lot of knowledge. Just so you can get an idea from an overall company perspective of our size and scale, we're about 24 billion euros, with where the euro to dollar conversion is today. It's a little over $30 billion in sales in 2012. 41% of those sales globally are in new economies. About 140,000 employees in over 100 countries, with about 4 to 5% of our sales dedicated to R&D. Fairly balanced in geography. The U.S. is certainly our largest market from the standpoint of a single country. And we serve, I won't try to clear those diversified end markets, but you can kind of see in that space the types of areas that we serve and kind of where our business breaks down overall in that end market space. One of the things overall when we approach energy efficiency, we do this from a holistic sort of view. And this energy management life cycle that you see on the screen, we think is a great way for you to really think about energy efficiency overall. You have to sort of start with, so what's the strategy that you're trying to accomplish? Is it pure energy reduction and savings? Is it also to reduce your carbon footprint? Is it a sustainability effort that you've got overall because of how you want to drive that sustainability through your corporate culture? So it's important to lay out that strategy. How do you buy energy services? What's the procurement piece of that look like? I'll talk about that a little bit from our perspective a little bit later in the webinar. How do I control that energy that I have? What's the reliability look like? Am I metering things that I need to do? How can I get feedback on those systems? But what kind of control systems am I going to have in place? How do I optimize what that overall energy spend looks like? What are the projects that I need to take on to improve my energy footprint or my energy intensity overall? How will those projects ultimately impact what I'm trying to accomplish in my strategy? And then ultimately, how am I performing? And this is a theme that you're really going to hear me repeat over and over again throughout this, is that the feedback, the continuing look at how you're performing in your energy space. Where do you deviate from that? Are you making the right corrections to get back on track? Is really a point that we think a lot of people miss overall when they take on their energy efforts, and it's one of the most critical elements to make sure you can maintain and go forward. This is also a really good example of why we support a lot of things in the marketplace. I'll give you one example. ISO 50001, the ISO standard for energy management systems. Strong supporter of the standard in that space. We think it's a great way to be able to look at overall what your energy program could look like, how you can get that up and started. For Schneider Electric, by the way, one of our headquarters buildings actually in France was one of the, or it is actually the first building that was certified to ISO 50001 from the energy perspective. So, you know, there are some great tools out there overall that you can draw upon in the marketplace. So one of the things that this sort of cycle that we look at in energy efficiency, and this is a pretty simple chart, but it points out where you got to have sort of a continuous loop if you're going to really be able to take advantage of energy efficiency overall. It is a continuous improvement program. Really, Most people are familiar with what I call the passive energy efficiency approach. It's sort of the fix the basics. How do I get low consumption devices installed? You know, how do I get the right insulating material in my building or facility? How do I do things like power factor correction that can certainly help me on the energy side? These are the basics that we can fix. The best example I'd like to give is, and probably one of the most popular, is as people do lighting change outs and actually go to more energy efficient lamps or energy efficient ballast. Those are really the things about fixing the basics. But that really moves on to an area of active energy efficiency. Now I've got to optimize really what I'm beginning to look at, because an energy efficient lamp is a great way to reduce energy, but if that lamp is on when it doesn't need to be on, then I'm still using energy that I really don't need to. So how can I do the right types of building control, lighting control, HVAC systems, things like variable speed drives? So you move into that space. That's a set of projects really that you can begin to look at in your facilities. Then I've got to monitor, maintain, and improve overall. So do I have metering installed? Not just on the overall building itself, but if I'm particularly industrial intensive facility, what's that look like broken down by my major areas of use? What kind of monitoring am I doing of that? What kind of analysis am I doing of that data? That kind of leads you back into the loop of what an energy audit can look like. How do I measure that overall? And you really start back into the cycle again with what are the next projects on my list that I may need to go do. So overall, in our facilities, we've made some really, really good progress. This is kind of a North American view overall for Schneider Electric. Between 2004 and 2011, about $24 million in energy management savings. We've reduced overall usage by about 30%, our natural gas usage by about 30%, and the environmental benefits overall, where we've avoided about 260,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. What's that the equivalent of, to put it in practical terms? That's equivalent to about 47,000 passenger vehicles, about 557,000 barrels of oil, makes up about the annual electric power for about 30,000 homes, or the annual amount of carbon that's sequestered by about 51,000 acres of pine forest. So we take not only the energy piece, but the overall sustainability approach, the overall environmental benefits. We really take that into our corporate culture and drive that across Schneider Electric in total. So if I kind of took this North American view and broke it down to a little bit more MEEA specific, so what's that look like for us sort of in the Midwest, in the facilities that we have that fit into that Midwest space? Now, we've broken this chart out so that you can really see this in two baselines, and this has to do with when we had facilities come online that could have been through acquisitions or through other means. But our 2004 baseline, a lot of those facilities that you see there are a lot of our major manufacturing facilities. The 2008 baseline then for a series of facilities that really came online later. So you can see what, for our Midwest, overall about $1.6 million in savings, about 33 million kilowatt hour reduction, that for a total over that time period from the baselines, and this is actually data through that was at the time about August of 2012, about a 21.3% reduction overall in our energy spend. So pretty good for the types of facilities that, that we have. Now, a little bit, as you look at these, you're thinking, so how did we, what kind of things did we do to actually get there? A number of projects that were implemented at varying points of time. A lot of times we'll get asked the question, how do you pick which project to go do? We do what every other business would have done. We prioritize those projects based on what the payback and the return can actually look like. So some of the key projects that we did, certainly lighting projects, where we moved kind of from T12 to T8, T5, and now moving to LED where that makes sense. We included things like emergency lights in that. Small usage, but a constant usage of electricity. In our processes, we looked at more energy efficient compressors. We really did a major variable speed drives program throughout a lot of these facilities cooling tower pumps, process water pumps, fans, to really gain that energy efficiency, through the speed control on the motors. Occupancy sensors in places like the offices, compressed air leak detection, and looking at overall, and power factor correction. So those are a few samples. I really want to go back to the one I skipped on the first of the list, because we really did key building management systems throughout these facilities as well. And it's interesting that if you talk to our facilities engineers in these, they will tell you that's probably been one of the single most important factors to implement sort of over the life cycle of what we're talking about. Their ability to actually look and understand how the building's being used, be able to control that building on a schedule basis and lay it out, really gave them the biggest bang for the buck over the life cycle that we're actually talking about. So, and I just listed some projects down here at the bottom of some different examples and how we kind of look at the simple payback that goes forward. And if you go back to that chart where I talked about sort of this constant life cycle that we're looking at, this is the set of projects at a point in time. We constantly go back and look at the next set of projects that might make sense to do to further improve our energy footprint. Now, out of this, because we have multiple facilities in multiple locations, we were able to really go in and create a global best practices manual for energy. It gives kind of a detailed description of our program, what are our best practices that we apply across our facilities, and it includes, sort of the preventative maintenance and the commissioning techniques that we might use overall. So it covers things from everything about how we purchase energy to ultimately what the energy usage picture looks like in total. So, by the way, let me mention one thing about that Global Best Practices Manual. Overall in that space, one of the big things that it does for us is it also gave us great insight of ultimately applying things for our customers overall. So many of these practices that we utilize on our own are the same practices that we take to our customers ultimately in the energy efficiency space. The great news about that is we're taking practices that we know have been well tested and well utilized even in our own facilities. So we have some really great examples for customers about how this can go forward. One of the areas that we're spending a lot more time in and that we deploy and we think it's really critical as people look at their overall energy usage and spend is the remote monitoring tools and metering that we put in place. This really lets us move from just talking about energy data to how do you actually turn this into energy information. And so we get meters in place for every place where we have a facility. We break that metering down into sub-metering categories. So we may be doing major processes. We may be doing the lighting systems if that's a significant part of the load, or the HVAC systems, so we can see what that consumption looks like in those major areas. We have over about 300 of these remote monitoring meters throughout our North American facilities, and really through what we call the energy operation part. And this little symbol that you see down in the corner is actually one symbol that represents an entire suite of areas that we have of a group called structureware. And energy operation is really part of the software basis of that, at taking data from these meters, combining it with other data that we have, and giving us a real picture of what the energy information looks like overall. We also, and if you go back to that life cycle chart that I had, encourage folks to ensure that, and we take advantage of looking at the supply side management part of this as well. What competitive energy procurement looks like. Our savings in 2012 was probably about $1.2 million there. We also utilize another part, again, you see another one of these symbols for us. It's part of our software suite that we refer to as Resource Advisor that we've deployed, that actually brings all of these different energy operation factors together. And so Resource Advisor will take what our procurement looks like, what our spend is overall, combine that with the energy data that we get from our facilities, and we can begin to see a really, really good, global picture, if you will, of what our entire energy spend looks like. So this is a good example of a dashboard that our folks may be looking at, on an everyday basis, depending on where they are, or perhaps on weekly or monthly basis, depending on what they're trying to accomplish. But getting this information into a way that I can actually organize it, I can begin to look at, in this particular approach as well, the next set of projects that are coming online. How have those been quantified? What will the impact of those projects be on my overall energy spend? We can even quantify that to what will the impact of those projects be on our carbon footprint overall, and how will that particular project contribute to that reduction. So when you put all this together, sort of my summary piece overall is stressing back what I did in that life cycle chart, that ongoing monitoring and improvement is just absolutely critical if you want to be serious in taking advantage of energy efficiency in your facilities or your locations. When you have the data, when you can look at the data, you can make much better decisions about that data overall. And so, do the right elements, identify the projects, get those pieces in place so you can monitor what's going on, then start looking comparatively, are you taking advantage of what you expected to as you implemented those projects. That's exactly what we've done in each of these facilities that I had listed for you earlier. There's another tool and technique I wanted to talk about briefly, and I want to make sure as I get this information out to you that I left plenty of time for questions and answers from the audience. But we do a lot of energy modeling overall as well. And it's interesting, I didn't put this chart up here for you to be able to read all of the numbers on it, but it's a screenshot of really the model that we apply in one of our facilities. And so what we're able to take is we can take the different factors that affect that facility, and how we measure that manufacturing index could vary from facility to facility, depending on what's being produced there. We look at cooling degree days, heating degree days, and through that, our professional services team actually created a model for each one of the facilities that we have. And through that model, we can look at how should we be performing in that facility compared to what the model projected that it would be. And the importance of that is, since we're taking account into factors like production and the major climate factors, which could be for our facilities obviously two of the largest things that impact the usage in energy overall, this will give a view as to whether or not that facility was actually performing in how the model projected it. And if it wasn't performing as well, what were the factors that sort of happened that made that facility not perform that way? We've been doing this since 2005. It's actually become a very, very good tool for our facility managers to sit down, and overall through our energy operations group, they look at this model on a monthly basis and they review it, and they spend more time at each one of those locations talking about what did your particular model look like for that location, why was it up or why was it down, and it drives increased participation from the facilities, which kind of brings to an important point when you talk about how can you be successful with these programs in industrial facilities. Engagement's one of the keys. And for us, it wasn't just about, you can do the spend, you can do the right things. This model really lets our facilities engineers sit down, and as a group, they're able to talk about, how it looked, what were the best practices that they had implemented, what had changed at that period in time, and they can share that more broadly. It gets more buy-in from the facility locations by doing it. We combine this also with our project tracking, so we can actually look at, as we do other projects, what was the impact of that on the model and how did we improve. So this is another example where our professional services team actually designed this, put the model together. We're utilizing some of the external models that also exist for this. You have to kind of customize it for the facility, but Through that application, we actually can do some of this modeling now for our customer base as well, and it gives them a good view of this overall going forward. So let me just try to summarize and make sure that we've got time for questions and answers if you have some. So what were the things that we were trying to get across? One is, to be successful overall in energy efficiency, work with the experts to analyze what the current state is and to make recommendations. We did this, now we have a little bit of advantage because we have a lot of experts because this is in our DNA, it's what we do. But we also have locations where we certainly worked with the local utility companies and used their audit programs even in our own facilities to really begin to look at the state of the facility and what the recommendations can look like. Take advantage of rebates, programs, and similar opportunities. We've done that where those programs have been available to us. We've certainly sat down with the utility that's offering that program and looked at whether or not the projects we're doing can qualify under those rebates. That becomes very important because for industrials and really for any commercial enterprise that's going to take on energy, these projects have to compete with any other project that you have going on in a facility. You know, I can reconfigure a particular line and invest in that and get some gain, or I can do something in the energy space. And so we're going to prioritize those projects just like any business would prioritize them. The advantages of the rebates programs and those kind of opportunities is when you shorten that payback time frame by being able to take advantage of those, you're going to move efficiency projects farther up on the list of areas that it makes sense for an industrial to take advantage of. Be willing to take on the hard projects to maximize efficiency. As I told you before, in our locations, the building management system, one of the key things that our facilities folks say, this has become really critical for us to get our biggest bang for our buck. Is implementing a building management system a simple project like changing out lamps and balances? Of course not. It's a harder project, but you can gain over the life cycle of the building significant advantages by taking on those more difficult projects. Stressing again my point about monitoring systems, if you want to take advantage over the long term, you need to do that monitoring and constant feedback loop. We've had some estimates and seen at some of our customer locations that without good monitoring in place, you can lose, we've shown some case studies where you can lose up to about 8% of what you gained. You can lose very quickly if you don't have that feedback loop in progress. I heard a large retail entity speaking at one point where they said they did great energy savings gains that they implemented, and the first quarter that they did it was like a 30+% improvement, and the second quarter, just that quickly, they saw they were only down, they had lost about 28% of that savings that they had gained. And what they learned through that was by putting the monitoring system ultimately in place, they found that the controls and the efficiency systems they had been put in place were getting adjusted back out of the system because people didn't have a good understanding of what was trying to be accomplished overall. So they put in the monitoring overall to be able to understand it. They did the training that was necessary for their people in the locations, and you can maintain that energy savings over the long, over the long haul to be able to sum those energy savings year over year up and get the type of advantage that you saw in our numbers earlier. So that's really what I've got to try to present to you, kind of where we were in our footprint and what kind of things that we did. Chelsea, I think it's probably a good time to open it up to questions from the audience if they have some, and we'll try to answer those where we can. Where they can't, or where I can't answer them, I'll get some answers from the right people internally, and we'll get back to those questions. So let's open it up if we can.
Okay, great. So I know that you were just speaking about how Schneider does try and take advantage of utility energy efficiency programs for their customers, but was Schneider Electric able to take advantage of various utility energy efficiency programs to implement energy efficiency goals, and what worked best, and if you have any I guess, suggestions on how to make programs better or more effective for Schneider?
So great question, and yeah, we did, where those programs were available and were available for the projects that we were going to do, we certainly did take advantage of those energy efficiency programs that were offered. You know, I don't have them by side. I can think of one HVAC retrofit that we did that had a program associated with it, and certainly I'm sure there were lighting and some other programs that were there. I think one of the challenges when you look at this from the industrial perspective is in most cases, not 100%, but in most cases, a lot of the programs that we see are really garnered around what I would refer to as kind of the short-term version of the project. You know, the lighting retrofit, I want to be careful when I say that's a short-term version. I mean, sometimes those can take you some time to actually get them implemented. But one of the things that can make programs better is to begin to look at projects that are over the longer haul for the industrial. And so those may be projects that can take a little more advantage of the process side of what goes on. And I would say even things like building management systems that can have a really big bang for the buck over a longer time period, those are difficult things to fit into a lot of the programs itself because most of those programs are looking at a much shorter time frame to try to get the payback. So, you know, what I would, a little longer haul on some of the programs could probably benefit the industrials more.
Okay, great, thank you. And just a reminder to everyone, you can continue to send in questions, and also this, the PDF of the presentation as well as a recording will be available on midwestindustrial.org/resources/webinars, so you all will be able to access that soon. So next question, does Schneider Electric market or sell your software for monitoring or reporting to municipalities for their use, even if they do not have Schneider hardware? And then they're asking for contact on that.
Very good question. And so the answer is yes. That software that we have will work with various types of hardware. Part of what we do in deploying that software is to, you know, whatever that data protocol is from where you're getting your metering data and so forth, you know, we can bridge that information over into the software. So yes, it can work with a very large variety of systems. And just for reference overall, because as people might leave the call and say, you know, I'm interested in more of that, you can certainly always drop us a note from the information that you had from the presentation. But if you're talking to somebody about it, it's really StructureWare is kind of the overall system. One of those particular elements of StructureWare I was talking about was a piece that we have called Resource Advisor that is really the place where a lot of that data gets aggregated.
Okay, great. Next question. Is the M&V model you use equal to DOE2, train, trace, and carrier HAP, and who accepts this at utilities for electric rebates, or have you organized or explored that channel?
So the first part of your question is I can answer partially that we are using some of the DOE models. Whoever asked that question probably got over my head very quickly about some of the real explicit pieces of the model, but I can certainly get you an answer to that question. And Chelsea, we can filter that question back to you, or the answer to that question back to you. Have we utilized that model with respect to utilities and associated with rebates? To my knowledge, the answer to that is no. We've taken most of the traditional approach in our facilities, which is where we've applied the model today. We've taken more of the traditional approach in working with the utility programs, you know, that would normally be in place versus talking about the model itself.
Okay, great. Could you discuss how Schneider Electric uses energy by fuel and end use, and how that influenced your energy efficiency projects that you implemented?
So I'm going to interpret the question a little bit. I don't have a breakdown of exact quantities that I could give you on, say, you know, and if we're just talking electricity versus natural gas, those would be our two biggest areas of, you know, from the perspective of how we actually run our facilities. I don't have a breakdown as to what the two of those look like in a ratio with each other. What the numbers that I gave you, by the way, in those Midwest facilities on the earlier slide, where I showed what the kilowatt hour savings were, that also included our natural gas. We converted all of that to kilowatt hours so that we could look at that sort of in aggregate and in total. But we're going to look at either one of those sets of projects as what's going to give us the payback to be able to go. So if it's an electricity based project that's a better payback than a gas, or vice versa, that's how we're going to go through and prioritize those.
Okay, great. Is the Global Best Practices Manual available to the public?
Good question. I knew that was probably going to come up. I think the short answer to that is no, because it's a set of internal practices specific to Schneider Electric. What I would say, though, I'll kind of go back to what I mentioned earlier on that practices manual. We've really taken that into a lot of the solutions that we offer for the customer base. So we're applying those practices as we're going out and working with customers on the energy efficiency projects themselves. And so some of those practices would be reflected there. But the best practices manual is an internal Schneider Electric document. It contains a lot of information that's specific to to our facilities overall.
Sure.
But good question, though.
Next question is regarding the overlap between EMIS and energy modeling. With submetering and EMIS analytics, why do you also need energy modeling?
So, it's a good question. And so overall with EMIS, we're going to get really real-time feedback, if you will, on what that performance is going to look like in total or in real time for that facility. Part of the purpose for the energy modeling piece of this is to now begin to try to take that and it allows us to really do a comparative view from previous year but let me just do by way of example. They would have been looking at January of 2013 and where that model said that they should be based on what January or however far back we go with that facility in the model of 2012 by way of example. And so if we've projected that model correctly, it allows us to take the production effects into account and what we can see that will begin to happen in the model, where you may see some different things happen in instantaneous use through that energy metering and so forth. The model can really tell us, did we have something substantially change in the facility that we need to be able to go back and look at? So, there may be cases where, we may run within 2 or 3% of the model, either underperforming or overperforming relative to where the model was. But if we see that change overall, that we're 10%, underperforming relative to the model, we've had some pretty significant things that have went on in the facility that the energy data itself may very well be reflecting sort of what happened at that day or what happened in that point of time, but it didn't really give us kind of that environmental effect overall, that's the cooling and heating degree days, as well as what the manufacturing, what we call the manufacturing index effect might have been in that model. So it does give you a comparative model, year before. If I were looking at pure energy information, I could certainly look at what was my energy usage and spend in January of 2012 versus January of 2013. But I've got to actually, being able to model that and turn that into what my expectations were gives me one more data point that I can work on. So the two really work hand in hand. A lot of that information that's coming from the monitoring is obviously what's playing into the model as well.
Okay. So this is a clarification on a number you mentioned. The 8% loss in energy savings without a monitoring system in place, were you referring to 8% of the savings or 8% of the total energy bill?
Good, very good question. 8% of the savings that you gained. So what we saw is, for instance, let me kind of do that whole life cycle. We talk in terms of a building in general and sort of in aggregate that a lot of times we can go in and 30% savings is not an unusual thing to be able to get to. So if you were able through those passive and those active methods to get to, say, 30% savings, what we've shown is that, or what we've seen in case history, is that you can lose about 8% of the savings you gained by not having that constant feedback loop that kind of tells you how you're performing, what your operation looks like. And by the way, I'll mention in there, making sure that you've trained people appropriately on how to use those tools and information.
Sure. So this is the last question I have queued up. So if you have any additional, please type them in the question box on the right. Does Schneider have like an average cost for the life cycle based on facility purpose and square footage?
That's a good question. Not that I have seen. Let me. What I'll do, Chelsea, is if you're tracking these questions, you'll get them to me. What I'll do is I'll do some work internally to see if we've got an answer to that, and then we can feed it back in whatever mechanism that you see fit, whether that's back to the individual that's asking, or when you actually post this, if you want to post that with it.
Sure. Great. Can you discuss a little more about where the lost efficiencies come from over time?
So one of the most interesting ones that I think that we've seen has been, I'm probably going to use a non-technical term here, but kind of letting your system get out of whack a little bit as to how you adjusted and calibrated it overall. So let me use a simple example. Where you don't keep your scheduling of the building up to date and how the building's actually being utilized are things where, people say, well, I set it on a schedule, and, 3 years later they go, for some reason, it doesn't perform as well as it used to, and what you find out is that how they're using the building changed. And so they didn't change their BMS scheduling to match up with actually their usage of the building overall. So those are examples of where we see. I'm going to be unfair to the folks in their own offices and locations with this, but user intervention is often another one where savings can be lost, and that is people find ways to tweak the system because they wanted it to perform in a certain way instead of letting the system sort of perform in the way that it was designed to. I always accuse folks, that finally, we put thermostats in offices, but, don't really connect them up to anything because you only want people to think they have control over what's going on in their office. It's an example where you kind of fine-tune this system, and through some means of user intervention, things can get out of, can change the performance of the system. Some other areas, overall, it's kind of interesting. Through good energy monitoring and through good feedback, you can also begin to see maintenance items that can begin to show up. Suddenly you're seeing spikes in energy usage on your compressor systems overall, or on some of your HVAC or fan systems. That leads people to actually, if you follow through, do some investigation and allow some maintenance to catch some of those things back up. But, we've also seen, by the way, examples where people will go through and do great retrofits on lighting systems, by way of example, but then, enough years pass and people kind of forget what was done, and ballasts get changed out, but they don't get changed out to the energy efficiency ballasts that were existing there before. So most of the things that we see that change in the system really are user-inspired, where those losses can come in, which kind of goes back to good monitoring, good training of the people involved, and you can maintain it.
Sure. Could you briefly describe 3 or 4 most common or most popular examples of EE programs or measures that you see being implemented?
3 or 4 of the most popular. So I guess, yeah, I'm trying to think, Chelsea, whether that's a question about EE programs that are offered or actual sort of energy efficiency projects that get implemented.
I'd be interested in the implemented projects, but.
Yeah, and that's probably about the only way I could that I could answer it, you know, and applying sort of our own, you know, history and background that we have there. And look, make no mistake, lighting projects are certainly, you know, going to be on the top of that list because you can get a lot of step function gain in energy efficiency with lighting projects, and they're I'm not going to say that they're easy to do, but they're probably easier to do than some of the other things that can be on the list. The second one that we see quite a bit of are implementation of variable speed drives, particularly if you're in processes or you're in locations where you have a lot of ventilation systems that are going on, you have a lot of fan pump motor control that's going on. Implementing drives, you know, is one of the most popular ways there to actually be able to take advantage of, you know, where I need reduced output, being able to do that through speed control. You know, I think one growing in popularity that we're beginning to be able to see is back to the building management system that I talked about a little bit. And people, I think, are beginning to realize as you implement what I talked about with remote monitoring, with the metering pieces, and you're getting the data back, people are beginning to realize very quickly that, you know, I can also, if I can centralize that control of that system and the benefits of that control, building management systems are gaining a little bit in popularity, you know, overall as well. So I think it's some of the normal ones that people would usually see, and then, you know, I'd kind of put the BMS one on top of that.
Okay, great. There were a couple follow-up points to that last question about lost efficiencies over time. First of all, is tweaking another form of feedback. It may be that the system is not performing as originally was set and should be checked. And then the second one was a question on how you take into account comfort when it comes to these.
Both very, very fair questions. And so what we try to, you know, what we try to look at in terms of facilities, and I can actually relate that point to even a broader approach that we're taking sort of on energy efficiency and energy benchmarking overall, is that you have to be able to do this with your processes still have to be able to perform, and the people that work in your buildings and locations still actually have to be able to work there in an environment that's expected. So we do look at things like indoor air quality and what's that going to mean overall, you know, when you are talking about the ventilation system. We do look at things like lighting, ultimately what lighting densities look like, and, you know, are you doing that overall with the large lighting systems? Are you doing it with task lighting? But you have to get the appropriate lighting in place to allow employees to be able to work and perform. So we're cognizant of those, and we actually have to take those into account when we look at it. To the first part of that question, is tweaking a form of feedback? Yes, it is. But I would also say that in many cases, tweaking can often be a piece of uninformed feedback as well. So if you're trying to do something overall with the building, in this case, we've seen situations where people have tried to alter the behavior of the building itself because of what they think is going on in the particular space and what they see in time. So they may not have the whole picture. I think the question probably comes from, and is certainly a valid question of, if I'm tweaking the thermostat in my office because I'm too hot or I'm too cold, then obviously I've got a problem, you know, that's associated with how the particular performance is in that office space. So yeah, it is a form of feedback, and you know, through that you can do proper investigation. Is there something that's going on with the HVAC system overall, or you know, do I have somebody that's simply more comfortable, you know, in the summertime at the temperature being at you know 70 degrees versus where your set point might be on a normal basis.
Great, thank you. So this is a question, a follow-up to the previous question about popular energy efficiency projects. So other than the BMS what can you think of other energy efficiency projects that you're surprised is not more frequently implemented?
That's a good question. Nothing comes to mind. I mean, this is not going to be a direct answer to the question. I think some of what people think end up believing to be the obvious projects that become really difficult to do and therefore don't get implemented can often be things like changes to the building envelope itself. I mean, you know, if I've got to do new insulation in a building because I have such great losses going on, that seems like an obvious one on the energy efficiency side, but it often is one that's not implemented because it can be really, really hard to do in the building envelope. So I probably don't have a great example that's a direct answer to the question. I have to think about that one a little more.
Okay.
You know, if I can come up with something, I'll provide that feedback back to you that we can post.
Great. Okay, well, that's all of the questions that we have, and we're actually right at our end time, so that's great. I put up all of our MEEA staff contact information. If anyone on the webinar has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can route everything to Jim. And Jim, thanks again so much for participating today. That was really informative. And the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be available on midwestindustrial.org/resources/webinars within 24 hours. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chelsea, and by the way, thanks for everything that MEEA is doing. You know, we're a big supporter. We certainly support the mission.
Great, thank you.